Hi, how's it going? So, little update here. This was supposed to be the third and final part of the world building review of the Harry Potter franchise, but funny thing, the review got so long that I'm gonna have to split that one into two parts, so this will be part 3 of 4. So, yeah. Look, I know guys, this really wasn't planned, so apologies in advance for that. And also, while we're at it, just a heads up, there will be some changes coming to the channel into the upcoming future, so keep an eye on those. Anyway, back to the video. Hello all, and welcome back to the third part of the world building review of the Harry Potter franchise. We have a lot to go through still, so if you haven't seen the first 2 videos, I highly encourage you check them out first by clicking the link in the corner and in the description below, because there's a lot that needs to be discussed first. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to keep this all going. Trust me, it'll be magical. If you have seen the rest, let's not waste any more time and jump right into it. Continuing with transportation. So, witches and wizards can use a whole bunch of ways to move around. So much so that, honestly, I kinda wonder why they even need all these methods of transportation. Like, you got stuff like flue powder, brooms, apparating, old ships that go underwater, flying carriages, flying vehicles, heck, even riding magical beasts, and in some rare cases, even flying. I mean, okay, some of these can be slower and be a bit of a hassle, but others are really damn convenient. Why even have the rest? Well, turns out there are some limitations in place for each and every one of them, but I think they should be tweaked a little further. The only one I won't really address will be the night bus, and that's only because it's already specified as being a one-of-a-kind public transportation system set in place by the Ministry exclusively for wizards who are specifically stranded and have no other way to move. So, aside from that, here's a rundown on how the rest of these are or should be fixed. Flue powder. You stand in a fireplace, say your destination out loud, throw some powder, and you're engulfed in flames and reappear at your desired location. So this is interesting because it's definitely a very private way of traveling, so that unless muggles are spying on you, they can't tell what's going on from inside your own home. This would of course mean that, culturally speaking, wizards would all have at least one fireplace in their household, and it would be as important to have as a computer or phone for us nowadays, and would definitely make commuting way easier than what we go through. Plus, it still means you're exclusively confined to travel to only other fireplaces and nowhere else, so it's not like it's an all-encompassing solution. However, I still think there are a couple of problems. First off, there isn't anything necessarily stopping anyone from popping out of a fireplace. Like, I get it that we said in the previous videos how wizards basically wouldn't have any privacy, but for real, just about anyone can pop in. Heck, a Death Eater could have arrived in a half-blood family or something and caused trouble if they wanted to. So I think that there should be some way to just block access through a fireplace. Be it a spell, a lever, a freaking door, or whatever. One that they could put in and out when they please. And that at most they can give access to someone specifically if they have like an access, a key, a password, or whatever, if absolutely needed. Second, while I get that you have to say your destination out loud, and you have to be very precise with it, it's incredibly generic to just say the overall area like Diagon Alley. Like, it doesn't mean that you'd know which shop you'd come out of necessarily. Or hell, what if you had to go like a regular neighborhood with hundreds of identical houses in a wizarding community? Heck, even at the Ministry we see that there's dozens of them in the same location. And while saying that destination wouldn't change much, it does mean that they can be built close together and could create confusion. So, very simply, I think that the flue network should be used by clarifying more specifically where you want to go, and each fireplace would have its own serial number or something. I mean, we have specific numbers to call our phones, so if we can do it, pretty sure they can. Apparition. A spell that can just make you teleport anywhere from one point to another. Honestly, this is kind of the biggest one for me, because why even have anything else if this is so convenient? But it does have some canonical limitations. First off, you can't just teleport anywhere on the planet. Only a small handful of exceptionally skilled wizards can go far enough, and even then, it's only like 1,000 miles tops for them. Heck, the longest distance recorded for Voldemort apparating was from Albania back to the Malfoy mansion, and even that was a strain for him, and he's the Dark freaking Lord. But yeah, I still think that apparating should have more limitations. Like maybe the further away you have to go, the longer you need to concentrate first, almost as if they were meditating or whatever. And even then, it's a maximum of about, I don't know, a couple hundred miles or something, tops. It's still enough for wizards to have met across continents by jumping from island to island anyway. Second, apparating canonically has to be done very carefully. It's like going through some tubes, except they deform you, and if you touch the edge of this tube, you get splinched, aka you get a really bad injury. So okay, there's this good canonical limitation here, but I think there should be the added limit of the wizard in question needing to keep a strong concentration through the entire transferring process, so as not to remain deformed when they come out and not injure themselves. So that if you're in danger or in a hurry, you raise the stakes and have to use this as a travel method only in calmer situations, otherwise it gets risky. Oh, and an extra limitation should be that the person apparating would require to already have been to the location they're going to, kind of like Nightcrawler from the X-Men. If they already visited it, good. They know the area and terrain, and there's far fewer chances to accidentally end up in a tree or something. If not, then they especially need that extra time to mentally be able to sense what obstructions they might find at the destination to avoid, something you can't do if you're in a hurry to get to that new location. Port keys. Any one random object that, when touched, can teleport you back and forth between only two places. Honestly, this works pretty fine, and can differ from apparating because you don't have to have any danger or hassle regarding splinching, focus, or whatever, but you're exclusively limited to one single destination and at most a return back. That's it, and the destination has to be physically reached first so that no one can just use a port key to appear in a stranger's living room and keep that line open. Honestly, this is pretty fine, so at most I'd add a distance limit here. Oh, and, well, just as a precaution, make it invisible too. I get it that they're random objects, but you never know if a kid or something might still pick it up absent-mindedly or whatever.
That's a rusty old knife. I'm gonna pick it up.
So might as well keep it out of sight until a wizard can reveal its presence. Assuming of course the witch or wizard knows beforehand that there is one there. Flying beasts. Pretty sure this is self-explanatory. It can be done, but the beast needs to be trained well enough, otherwise it'll just attack you, and has to be big enough to travel on. Not to mention they'll have distance limits, they'll require feeding and all that stuff, just like any other animal. Maybe just add an invisity spell as well, just to be safe. So yeah, I think we're good here. Brooms. So, of all the travel methods, this one's kind of the middle ground one. Brooms are the one classic iconic image that one can associate when thinking of witches, so it makes sense that it came from our actual culture of what a witch or wizard is like. In fact, it's justified with an in-canon explanation as well, because witches and wizards can grow anti-gravitational trees, and we can say that they carve out branches so they'd be able to ride them, and disguise them as brooms so even muggles wouldn't be suspicious. And no joke, by the way, in the Goblet of Fire book, Neville reads of a guy growing those specific trees in Nepal.
Do you know there's a wizard in Nepal who's growing gravity-resistant trees?
Neville, no offense, but I really don't care.
So it checks out. And so, with these in possession, while witches and wizards wouldn't necessarily use these for long distance travels unless absolutely needed, they can certainly use them for short ones or reach higher places with ease. Also, fun fact here, there's a legend that the Russian school for magic is so hardcore, the students don't ride branches, but full-on trees. God damn, that's so metal. But, of course, brooms are a necessity when one requires flying with loose freedom, because one thing that's certainly hard to do is flying. Yeah, We see Voldemort and the Death Eaters do it, as well as some good wizards, but that's the thing, some. As far as I'm concerned, this ability can be a thing, but should be used exclusively by people who are hyper skilled at this. Or perhaps, in the same way wizards are also separated into being individually proficient in transformation, mind reading, etc. as a natural personal power, flying should be one of them for some people, and again, even then as a super rare case. So yeah, that's all. If you want to fly, it should be super hard and super rare. And, of course, you can't go that far for that long. And we can say that the flying distance depends on your stamina or something, just to keep it more balanced. Flying vehicles. Wizards seem to be able to enchant certain vehicles to be able to turn invisible and fly as they please. So it kinda makes me wonder why they need these at all. In some cases, they can even enchant other vehicles like the Durmstrang ship that submerges. And by the way, that seems super impractical and slow considering everything else available. But whatever, we can chalk it down as it being only a Durmstrang tradition to appear via this ship, same with the carriage for Beauxbatons, exclusively for traditional reasons for the Triwizard Tournament. Anyway, for these vehicles, I think the best case scenario to explain them would be when they're needed to carry numerous amounts of people. Something that, if you think about it, all the previously mentioned methods won't necessarily account for. The invisibility and flying parts are all just made to ensure that muggles won't see them and to speed things up. In fact, you know what? I think that at this point, any form of invisibility magic should have a time limit and at most requires recharging time. So it benefits them to have them as muggle vehicles so that they can keep going normally without raising suspicion while they recharge their invisibility before taking off again. Plus, we can say that the Weasleys had it because Arthur was doing research on how a muggle car properly functions or something. Alright then, seems like we covered pretty much all of the methods of transportation. Except, as you might have noticed, there is one that's missing from this picture. But it's an element that requires a much more in-depth discussion than all the others, and thus merits its own chapter. And that is none other than the Hogwarts Express. The infamous Scarlet Steam train that goes from the secret platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross Station all the way to Hogwarts, specifically meant for all the students to reach the castle. Yet, I always wondered, why the hell even have this damn train considering all the other far more useful methods of transportation that we just mentioned? Like, it doesn't even go supersonic or anything. It's just a regular train and takes an entire damn day of travel just to reach its destination from London to the mountains of Scotland. So what gives? Why does this school implement this? Well, believe it or not, there's actually some lore behind this in the real-life King's Cross station in London that we can use. See, 2 millennia before its construction, there was a ruling queen of the ancient British Iceni tribe called Boudica, who led a failed uprising against Roman invasions. It was in this location that Queen Boudica fought her last great battle somewhere between 60 to 61 AD, and it's supposed that she was also buried there. This got me thinking then. What if, when witches and wizards do die, not all, but at least some trace of their magic does linger in the area where their bodies died? And yes, I'd say that magic doesn't recycle itself back into nature in full force when a witch or wizard dies, because if that was the case, magic folk would burn the bodies to avoid chaos magic from bursting out of a body's lifetime of storing chaos magic. Whereas instead, we see that they do culturally bury their dead, so it's fine if their bodies are still around. It's a sign that even if some chaos magic does leak back out, it's nothing too dangerous, only small amounts at most. If that's the case, since Boudica was such a fierce warrior, what if she was also a witch in her time, but simply never properly found out or realized this? This was the ancient Roman times after all, so even magic folks' understanding of this force wasn't fully understood or harnessed yet. and at this point we can say that it helped her in her battles, except for this one time where she failed. With this scenario, since this great battle was fought there, the ground could have been stained with the magic of her and her soldiers, and this magic could have blossomed very slowly over time, especially if others in her armies were unknowingly witches or wizards as well, and thus stained the ground and saturated it slowly over time with magic. Now, let's take into consideration the location of Hogwarts for a moment. The founders chose to build the castle in the middle of the Scotland mountains because, at the time, they figured that it was the most hidden and hardest point to reach for Muggles. They wouldn't have known Muggle technology would have advanced like it did in the future, so nowadays there are enchantments to make Muggles think that it's just a bunch of ruins and not go inspect it. Although, I don't know, I'd add in more magical precautions to make sure it doesn't become a tourist trap, but whatever. So, if Hogwarts is in Scotland, then people would need to reach it. And in the medieval times it was built, London was very much an existing place and still had, even then, one of the highest concentrations of inhabitants in all of Britain. If witches and wizards had to reach the castle, not necessarily everyone could use the previously mentioned methods of transportation since magic wasn't as understood as it is now, and some if not all of the previously mentioned methods of transportation wouldn't have been available yet. So inevitably, there would have been always some large conglomeration of people who decide to go on a pilgrimage from London, aka the place with the most likely high concentration of wizards, all the way to Hogwarts. Through this trail, over the course of a few centuries, there could have been people who simply might not have made the journey and died along the way from famine, harsh weather, bandits, or whatever. Now, take into consideration what we said about Boudica. If, in our theory, her death meant that the ground could have ever so slightly been rendered magical soiled from that heavy bloody battle, and their burials, then the same could have happened through this pilgrimage path. Now witches and wizards have an entire trail stomped and reinforced magically through several centuries that connected these two locations. So, I propose that over time, as they started to understand magic more, yes, they'd learn these other methods of transportation, but they would continue on treading this path, first off because at this point it would become tradition, dare I say a rite of passage, but second because perhaps they might have also further enhanced this magic path, seeding it with more and more protection spells that would sustain themselves all on their own, reinforced from further magically enforced soil from people who simply didn't make it all the way there. And by the time students would reach Hogwarts, they'd be just drenched and saturated in a whole slew of protection spells that would last them an entire semester to more easily resist and survive the very same dangerous chaos magic they would be studying in the castle. Then, canon fact here, in 1827, the then Minister of Magic, Ottilie Gamble, made the then controversial decision to incorporate the latest in Muggle inventions, a steam locomotive, as an official method of transportation for students to Hogwarts, so Muggles wouldn't grow suspicious from all these pilgrimages. It would then make sense as to why they'd have chosen that very vehicle. A huge machine that could transport hundreds of people with ease that wouldn't raise suspicions if concealment charms would fail for whatever reason, but in general could be seen and accessed by official students, their parents, and teachers at Hogwarts. No one else could ever enter or attack it, or hell even see it, unless only Hogwarts itself officially and exclusively allowed it, thus still allowing Harry and Ron to reach it with the Weasley car since they are officially enrolled students, the Dementors to stop it in Prisoner of Azkaban because it was a ministry order, and thus even Hogwarts had to obey it, and Death Eaters to stop it in the Deathly Hallows because Snape was a headmaster at the time anyway, and was working for Voldemort on the surface. None of them were technically invading or hunting it without permission, so it all checked out. Also, no. You might think that the train could have been magically enhanced to zoom all the way to the castle at rapid speeds. After all, the night bus does do exactly that. But witches and wizards didn't actually implement this for the Hogwarts Express. Why? Because in order for these protection spells to be placed on the students as they went through this path, they need to do so slowly or they wouldn't work. And thus, this would be the reason as to why, against all logic, Hogwarts still uses to this day the same method of transportation. It's not just tradition, but a safety process that needs to be put on the students by slowly retracing an age-old path drenched with protection magic from the most densely populated area in the country to the castle before they go in and train to control this enormous magical force that's hard to tame in as safe a manner as possible. And here we thought Hogwarts didn't care about student safety. Oh, and by the way, real quick, since I didn't find the space to put this anywhere else in these reviews, I think that in the same way magic can be slowly reinforced over time, it can sometimes sort of get used to certain things. For example, since in antiquity magic wasn't fully understood as being this force that can be harnessed, many people thought it was just divine intervention. And so, when they wanted to do something, they'd pray to have that something happen. And what was one of the most well-known spoken languages at the time? Latin. So, I think that over centuries and millennia, since many people spoke Latin, I think that chaos magic ended up having sort of an imprinting, so that even after magic folks started to understand it more, Latin might have died as a language, but chaos magic still reacted best through that language, and that's why, to this day, spells are done by saying Latin words. Heck, even if it died afterwards, people in the medieval times still used Latin as a prayer, so I would imagine that even through prayer, those who didn't realize they were using magic would have helped keep this function still alive, which is exactly when witches and wizards would at least start taking studying magic more seriously. Look, I know this is not exactly accurate historically speaking, but this was the best I could come up with. Alright, so we got all of that out of the way. But with that said, it does raise an important question. If this whole magic stuff earlier regarding Boudica happened once, could it happen again elsewhere? The answer, believe it or not, is yes. But we will get into more detail about that next time in the fourth and final part of this series of the world building review of the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. So, stay tuned, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, join my Patreon if you want to support what I do here, and I'll see you all on the other side. Thanks again for watching, and of course, as always, keep building worlds.